Okay folks, today we're going to have a look at the through housing joint, which is perhaps one of the most simple of the carcass joints that we'll come across. Now we're going to be working from our woodworking booklet today, just looking at the practice joint that's described here in the booklet, and this is the drawing we'll be working from. Okay, so if I hold this up, you can see in a bit more detail that our end result will have two pieces of timber, one with the housing joint cut through, that will allow the other one to slot neatly in. Okay, now as with any joint, we want to be referring to this drawing fairly frequently to make sure that we're getting our sizes, our dimensions correct. So as you can see, for this particular piece, it began as a 200mm long piece of timber, which we were then required to cut into two separate lengths to allow us to form the joint. So this was a 200 piece of timber here, but Blue Peter style, I've already cut them into the two required lengths. Okay, so this short piece here at 80, and then one at 110. So what we're going to be looking at is marking out this area here, which is going to form our through housing joint. It's going to form the slot for the housing joint. Now, as we can see, it's 45mm from the outside edge. So that's the first measurement we're going to have to make on the timber. Before I begin to measure and mark out the timber though, I need to mark my face side and face edge. So when I take the timber, I want to find the smoothest edge. Okay, so from the long edges here, I've got 1 and 2 on the other side, and I want to find out which of these is the smoothest. If we're thinking about practical wood terms, we're talking about the planed edge and the sawn edge, and the planed edge will be the smoothest one, and for me is this one. Okay, so that's going to become my face edge. When it comes to the face side, they're roughly similar, okay, the same. They've both been planed, so it doesn't really matter which one I choose as my face side. But this one is definitely smoothest in terms of the edges, so that's going to become my face edge. So when it comes to marking the face side and face edge, I would always do the face side first, and I like to think of it as a fish. You just draw the loop there, and it makes a fish. And then on the face edge, you just give that fish a tail, a little flick on the face edge. So there we go. Face side, the loop, and the face edge, the little flick. So the fish and the fish tail, if you like. So now that I've marked the face side and face edge, I know that these are the two sides, or this is the side and this is the edge that I'll be measuring and marking from at all times, and that helps me to be more accurate. So, as I said, we are looking at 45mm from the outside edge, so I'm going to take my steel rule, and the steel rule is going to go right up against the edge of the timber, because steel rules start on 0, there's no extra bit. So I can just start right here on the edge of the timber. So it's going up there, I'm bringing it close to the side, I'm going to make a dot at 45mm. So you can see 40 and 50mm here, and the longer dash in the middle is halfway, so that is 45. So if I just make my dot there at 45mm, that's, there we are, you can see that. And it doesn't have to be a long dot, you can see it's a very small dot there, because I'm going to use my tri-square to draw that across. So that's nice and accurate. I can take my tri-square now and draw this as a line across the face side of the timber. Now with my tri-square, we have the brass face. Okay, so we've got the stock, the handle, the brass face, and the blade. And the clue is in the name there. The brass face is going to touch either the face side or the face edge. And in this case, it's going to be the face edge. Okay, it's going to be the little flick here. So that's be touching that side of the timber. I'll then line it up with the dot I made here at 45mm. Happy with that. And I need to keep a nice tight grip on the tool and the timber, so I don't want a gap between the tri-square and the timber. If there's any sort of gap, then the line that I draw will not be 90 degrees. So if I turn it around, you can see here I've got a nice, good grip on the timber, good grip on the tri-square, and I'm pulling it in. I've got a nice, good, tight grip on that. So I can just draw this across once with my pencil, and that's there, a line 45mm from the edge of the timber. Now I'm going to continue to hold this where it is. I'm not going to let go of this just now, because I want to score a line across here with my marking knife. Now if I use the marking knife, it helped me to be more accurate when I come to cut this joint. So I'm going to continue to hold the tri-square exactly as it is, exactly in the same position. And I've now got my marking knife. And this marking knife is going to score the line across here, just on top of the pencil line, and it will help me to be more accurate when I saw, because the edge of this knife, as we can see here, is going to be sharper, finer than the tip of my pencil. So I'm going to put this down on the bench. I'm going to keep the tri-square in the same position as it was in. You can see I'm still holding the tri-square nice and tight, so that there's no gap. And I very simply score this line across with my marking knife and make sure that my fingers are well clear of the blade. Like so. So when I take this tri-square away now, we can see that I've got a line marked across, and I can see it with a pencil, but I can actually feel the line that I've marked there because I've scored it with the marking knife. And that's going to help me to be more accurate when I come to cut this joint. We'll go back to the drawing. We have marked this line here 45mm from the edge, and we can see here that we're told that the width of the joint is 19mm. Now we know in this instance that we're actually just joining it with a piece of timber. So rather than measuring 19mm and potentially getting it wrong, potentially measuring 18 or 20 by mistake, rather than measuring that, what I'm going to do is use the piece of timber that is going to form the joint with this piece of timber. So I know that this piece will eventually slot in here to make the through housing joint. So this is the piece of timber that I'm interested in. So I could take my steel rule and I could measure it. I could find out if it is 19mm. As we can see there, it's pretty close. It could be 19, it could be 20. The chances of me getting the exact thickness of this when I measure on the timber is quite slim. So rather than taking that risk, I'm just going to use the timber itself, and that way I know that I've got the required thickness. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place this second piece of timber directly on top of the line that I've just scored. I'm going to make a small mark with my pencil on the other side, and that way I know that the distance I now have is the exact thickness that I require for this joint. And with this dot here, I'm going to do the exact same as I've done before with the tri-square. I'm going to score that, I'm going to draw that line across. And remember, face side, or face edge rather, of the timber has to touch the face of the tri-square. So I'm going to bring them close together. Again, making sure that there is no gap between timber and tool. Line it up with the dot that I've got here, and across it goes with the pencil. Like so. And again, I'm just going to hold that in the exact position that I already have it in, very carefully put it down on the desk. Now it slipped there, it moved, so I'm going to have to bring this back to the position I need it to be. There we go. Again, holding my tri-square nice and tight against it, making sure that my fingers are clear of the blade. I'm going to bring my marking knife in and score this line into the timber. Just make sure I've got all the way across. There we go. Take that away, we can bring it up, we can see there, I now have two lines marked and scored across the face side of the timber. So I now need to bring these two lines down onto both edges and mark the required depth here on the joint. So first thing I'll do is I'll take my tri-square. Face of the tri-square this time is going to touch the face side, the side with the fish, as I like to call it. I'm going to bring my tri-square just up to that line there. See if I can get the camera to focus. It's not focusing, but you know what I'm doing. I'm bringing my tri-square, there we go, focus there. Bring the tri-square right up to that line and squaring it down onto the edge, like so. Now I don't need to use my marking knife for this. The pencil will be fine for this, because I'm not actually going to be cutting. Turn it round, and I'm going to do this line here this time. Bring the tri-square up to that line. Nice and accurate, nice and tight as usual, and squaring that line down as well. So we've got two lines now on the face edge of the timber. I'm going to need two lines on the opposite edge as well. So same process, face of the tri-square touching the face side of the timber. Get that nice and accurate there. Pencil that in. Turn it round, tri-square still touching the face side, and bring that down onto the edge as well. So we now have 2 lines on the face side, face edge, sorry, 2 lines across the face side and 2 lines down the opposite edge, ready for me to mark the depth of this joint. So if we refer back to our drawing, we can see here that we're given a depth of 6 millimeters. 6 millimeters is the depth of this through housing joint. So for that, I'm going to need my marking gauge. We've got our marking gauge here. And so a quick reminder on the parts of the marking gauge. We have the stem, the stock, the spur, up here, the spur, and the thumb screw, which tightens and loosens the stock. So to correctly set the marking gauge, I need to take my steel rule, the flat side of which will go against the top of the stock. It's going to be right here against the outside edge of the spur. I don't want to be holding it against the stem because that is less accurate. I want it to be right here on the sharp point of the spur. That's the bit I want to measure it against. I'm going to set this distance to 6 millimeters. Now, again, a little reminder here on how we use the marking gauge properly. I've loosened the thumb screw so the stock is moving up and down. You notice that I'm not actually holding the stock. Okay, I'm just pushing the stock up and down with my thumb underneath, so that when I get to the measurement I need, it's not going to move and I can tighten the thumb screw. If I try to hold the stock, it's less accurate, it's more likely to move about. But if my thumb's underneath it, it can't go down after I've set it. So I'm going to bring this up to 6 millimeters, so I can find 5 fairly easily, and then it's 1 millimeter above that. Hold that in place and tighten the thumb screw. And I'll just double check that in case it moved after I tightened it. But hopefully you can see that there, if the camera would focus, that is 6 millimeters. I'm happy with that being 6 millimeters. So with our marking gauge now, we can mark the depth between these 2 lines for the slot that we're going to cut for this housing joint. Now the marking gauge will work similarly to the tri-square. You can see here we've got 2 brass plates on the top of the stock. Some marking gauges will have these, some won't. But what we need to remember is the top of the stock, the side of the stock that's closer to the spur, is the face of the tool. And therefore this is going to have to touch either the face side or the face edge. And in this case, again, it's going to be the face side. The stock is going to be touching the face side, so I can use the spur here on the edge. So what you might want to do is practice running this across just now with no gap. You can see there that I'm trying to make sure there's no gap between the tool and the timber, so that the line I score with the spur here is nice and straight. So I'm going to bring it nice and tight. I've got a good grip on it. I'm using my thumb here to apply a bit of extra pressure. And I'm just going to score that line between the 2 there. And I'll pencil it in just to make it that little bit clearer. There we go. So you can see that line there marked at a depth of 6 millimeters. Turn the timber round. Again, still on the face side. That's where the tool is going to go, and I'll do the same thing. I'll take it to the line here, pull it back to score that line, and I'll pencil it in. If you struggle to do that freehand, I would recommend putting the timber in the vise, and then you can use both hands on the marking gauge. And there we go, score that line in there, and we've got a depth of 6 marked on both sides. All that's left to do now is to mark this out as waist, so everything above this 6 millimeter line I can score out as waist. Everything between these 2 lines is waist, and everything above this line is waist. So this joint is now ready for me to cut. So when it comes to cutting the joint, there's a few different ways we could do it. We could use our traditional saw board or bench hook and saw it freehand. We could clamp it to the desk with a scrap piece of material on either of the lines to give us a nice edge. But the best way I think to do this, and the way I would recommend doing this, is to secure the timber in your bench vise. So you can see here, we can still see the line that I've marked at 6 millimeters. So I'm going to be able to clearly see when I need to stop sawing. I've not got the line right against the edge of the bench vise. I don't want to saw into the bench vise and damage it, but it also just makes it a little bit clearer when I need to stop sawing, if I've got a bit of clearance here between the line and the vise. It's the exact same on the opposite side of this. If you were to look around at this side, you would see that there's the same clearance on that side. So it's secure here, it's not going to move, it's nice and secure in the bench vise, and it's ready for me to begin sawing. So once we have secured the timber and the vise and we're ready to saw, we need to saw this joint with our tenon saw. Okay. Quick reminder on the proper way to hold the tenon saw. We should be using our index finger to point down the length of the saw as we hold it. Okay. Some people will call this the pistol grip, as you seem to be making a sort of gun shape with your hand. The reason for that is it'll help me keep the saw nice and straight. It's more comfortable to hold it this way. I find it very uncomfortable to try and put my index finger within the handle. It's much more comfortable having my index finger pointing out the way, but its main purpose is to help keep the saw straight as we saw. So you can see we've got it secure in the timber, in the vise here, and I'm going to begin sawing on this line on the left hand side. And as we should hopefully be aware, we should also saw inside the waist area of a joint. So if I'm sawing on this line here, I'm going to saw to the right hand side of that, so that I'm sawing into the waist area. Because we've marked these lines with our marking knife, the saw should find it much easier to find its position. Okay, so I'm going to use my spare hand to help guide this saw into the position I need it to be. I've got it right here on the line. So I've got my spare hand here holding the saw when I need it. I'm going to draw backwards to give me a starting notch here. You can see I've got a little notch started here. So just going to continue drawing backwards on that point and pushing forwards. Drawing back. You can see here we now have a line all the way across the timber inside the waist area, and I'm now going to saw down to the required depth of 6mm. Now you saw previously how I'd set this up in the vise where I can still see the line that I need to stop sawing at on both sides. So I'm going to continue to saw until I see that the saw has reached that line on both sides of the timber. Now whilst I'm sawing, I can see this side, but I can't see this side. I can't see the line that I've marked on this edge of the timber, so I'm going to have to stop occasionally and check to see that I haven't overstepped the mark, I haven't sawn over the line on the far side. Put the saw in position. Because this is only 6mm, it will not take very long to saw through. So I'm going to turn my head round to see that I haven't hit the line on the other side. And that's me happy with that. I'm happy that I've now reached the line on both sides. I haven't sawn too deep. Okay. Same process, exact same for this line here on the right hand side. I want to be sawing inside the waist area. So in this case, I'm going to be sawing slightly to the left of this line. So I'm sawing inside the waist area. The process remains exactly the same. I'm going to use my spare hand, my left hand here, to help guide the saw. I'm going to drop back to give myself that starting notch. I'm going to draw that all the way back across the timber, like so. And I'm just going to saw that down to the required depth of 6mm. A little bit more to go. And I'm happy with that. So if I remove this from the vise now, excuse me, you can see there, I've hit the depth on that side, and I've hit the depth on that side. So I've sawn through that now, and this is now ready to chisel. So as we can see, we've re-secured the timber in our bench vise, and what I've done here is put a piece of scrap material behind this timber to allow me to chisel through safely. Okay, the reason for that being is if my chisel was to continue through the entire length of the timber and come through into thin air, there's a strong possibility of the timber splitting. But if I've got some scrap material behind it, that should prevent that from happening. So what I have here is my bevel edge chisel. I have chosen one with an appropriate width that's not too wide for the joint. Okay, and this is how I'll be chiseling the joint. It's going to start just below the top of the timber, and I'll be removing small pieces at a time. Now you can't see this on camera here, but what I'll be doing is I'll be holding my chisel overhand. I'm holding the handle here with enough of the tool handle available at the bottom for me to strike with my mallet. Okay, I'm just going to line my chisel up just below the top of the timber. You can see that I'm pointing the chisel in an upwards direction. I will never chisel into the wood in a downwards angle. It's always going to be pointing towards the ceiling. And I'll just tap it there with the mallet to take a small piece out, and that's fine. I move my chisel slightly further down and continue to knock that through with the mallet, slightly further down again. Continue knocking that through. You can see I'm getting close to the bottom now. Knock that through, and I've maybe got a tiny millimetre just about there. There we go, to get that right on the edge. So I've taken that right down to the line that I marked with my marking gauge, depth of 6mm, and I've come about halfway through the timber here, and I've created almost a ramp, if you like, going up the way into the timber. So what I'll do now is put my tools down. I'll take this out of the vise and turn it round. I'm now going to start chiseling from the opposite side. The process will remain exactly the same. So you can see here I've got the timber secure in the vise. I can see my pencil line. Taking my bevel edge chisel, it's just below the top edge, and I will begin chiseling through again. So I'm moving it slightly further down with each time. Now there's a small knot there, you might have spotted that, which made this one slightly more difficult, but as you can see, I've managed to get through it. There we go. So that's me taking away the majority of the material now inside this joint. So with most of the material removed, what I want to do now is get a nice even surface, a nice level surface through the base of this joint. So I'm going to do that first by using my bevel edge chisel. So same chisel I was using already. I'm going to take it in both hands this time. I shouldn't need the mallet for this because the majority of the material has already been removed. Holding it in both hands, I'm going to keep it fairly level. I'm going to begin pushing it through the timber here to clear away the waste material. So I'm going to keep a close eye on the line that I've marked with my pencil to make sure I don't take too much material away. And this scrap piece of material becomes really important here because this is the time we're more likely to take this chisel all the way through the timber. And if this piece of material wasn't here, the timber would split as I took that all the way through. So it's really important that we keep this in the vise. So I've got both hands on the chisel, I've got a close eye on my pencil line, and I'm working this through to clear away excess material. It shouldn't take long because I've already done most of it already. I can clear away the scrap bits of material there. And same as I've done before, I'm going to turn this round to come in from the other side now. Give it a tap to clear away some of the scrap pieces there. So again, really important that I remember to put my scrap material in behind it as I tighten this up. And I'll come in again from the opposite side, doing the same thing, like so. Blow away the scrap that's there. So if I was to take this out now, you can see that I've got a pretty good surface there in the base of this joint. But if I want to get it perfect, I need to use my hand router. So when it comes to setting the depth on the hand router, you want to be right down here so you can see into the joint. You can see that you're going to set the level of the blade of the hand router to the level that you've marked your joint at. You can see here that this is basically just a small chisel blade, comes to a sharp edge here. I'm going to set that sharp edge, the depth of that edge, to the 6mm depth that I marked on the timber. So I can just about see my pencil line here on the left hand side of this joint. So I'm going to take this in. I've got 2 thumb screws here. Well, I've got 1 thumb screw that loosens this bracket. And I've got this little wheel here, which if I spin, raises and lowers the blade on the hand router. So if I've got this in position here, I'm going to raise the blade as it is just now because it's a bit too low for me just now. I'm going to raise this blade by spinning the wheel until the edge of the blade is on the pencil line that I can just about see. So I'm happy with that there. I'm happy that I've now set the blade to the correct depth. I'll just tighten this other thumb screw here to lock that blade in position. And that's now ready for me to use to clear this joint out to the required depth of 6mm. So with the hand router set to the correct depth, I can take both hands on the handles here. Now you can see obviously the width of this chisel is not large enough to do the joint in one go, so I'll have to move across the joint. I'm going to start on the left hand side here and push through now to start clearing it out. Now you can see I'm barely getting anything removed here because I've done most of the work with the chisel. Okay, the hand router is just for that tiny bit at the end, just to fine tune your work, just to clear up any rough edges that you might have missed. So I'm taking particular focus on this area here because I know that was a bit too high. You can see most of it isn't coming away. Now when we're using the hand router, we should only be travelling about halfway through the timber and then turning and coming through from the other side because we don't want to split it as the chisel blade moves through to the other side. Take this out, turn it around, secure it there and push through again from this side. But as you can see, most of the work has already been done. There's not really anything coming away here because most of that was fine. So if we have a look here, you can see I've got a pretty good flat, even surface all the way through there. There's no real peaks or troughs there. It's all relatively flat the whole way through. So if I take my second piece of timber, the bit that was cut off previously, these should now slot together fairly well. If I let go, it stays in place. So you can see there I've got a pretty decent through housing joint here. Timber stays in place, I can turn it upside down, give it a wee wobble, it's not falling out. And that's what we're looking for in a through housing joint. Now obviously, if I was using this in a project, I would be gluing and cramping it together to get a really secure solid finish. But this is a good test. You know you've got a good joint if the timber stays in without the use of glue. So all that would be required for me to do now is to sand away all of my pencil marks and to properly assemble this with glue and a cramp. But that is how you mark out and cut a through housing joint.